Majority Report with Sam Cedar, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
It is Friday, June 12th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. It's Casual Friday, folks. My voice is, believe it or not, on the mend. Joining us, Benjamin Dixon from the Benjamin Dixon Show. Also, David Roth, former Deadspin writer, now writing everywhere, including the New Republic. Also on the program, Donald Trump calls for compassionate force in policing. Gonna kill them with love. New polling, most Americans, including Republicans, support the Democratic police reform proposals. Doesn't mean they go far enough. Meanwhile, cops showing regret for joining protesters and taking a knee, and the military showing regret for being used by Trump. Oregon pauses their reopening as nearly a dozen states hit their highest levels of new cases of coronavirus. Trump plans rallies with limited liability for his supporters and to disrespect the memory of multiple racial carnages. Steve Mnuchin says the PPP loans are now secret, and Congress is dropping its own ball in its failure to provide any oversight for the rest of the bailouts. Meanwhile, the country is on the precipice of mass evictions, particularly in black, brown, and low-income communities. Elizabeth Warren's amendment forces a Republican Senate committee to vote to change Confederate names on military bases. Joe Biden balks at the Bloomberg Digital Agency, and Donald Trump sanctions the International War Crimes Court because it had the audacity of investigating Afghan war crimes. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Please forgive me. My voice is obviously, as you can tell, not at its peak performance, but even at, I think it's probably around, what would you say, Brendan? Matt, you guys listen to me almost every day, drone on and on. Would you say the voice is at like 40% or 60%?
I would say 60, because it doesn't seem like you need to cough a lot, or, it just seems depressed a little bit.
Right. It's depressed. Believe me, all of it's depressed.
You're not dropping words.
Right.
Or sounds.
Even at 60%, ladies and gentlemen, I am still hovering around like 130% of your average political podcast, live podcast host, I would say, right?
Yeah, your above replacement is about a 6. So, you're
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but the voice is
I miss baseball.
The voice is depressed. And And this, of course, is a function. I've been told that this happens to me every year around this time. Maybe it's allergies. I contend it's just yelling at my children, but who knows? Meanwhile, let's get to this. This is Donald Trump has now planned a rally for, I guess it's a week from today, Juneteenth, June 19th, which is a day that commemorates, I don't know if commemorates is the right word, but stands in recognition of of slavery and its abolition and the problems of race and that Black people have dealt with since the founding of this country. Tulsa, Oklahoma, of course, this year we're recognizing it's been 99 years, the Tulsa massacre. And so at the very least, it's incredibly insensitive. It's a function of maybe no one around there in that operation being aware of things. At its worst, it is a redux of Ronald Reagan in I guess it must have been 79, launching his campaign for the presidency in Philadelphia, Mississippi, in Neshoba County, literally just miles away, and in Neshoba County Fair, I think it was, miles away from where 3 civil rights activists were murdered by the KKK. And that murder also was, the subtext of that was the idea that, like, you Northerners, you federal government cannot come here and tell us how to treat our Black people. And when Ronald Reagan made his announcement, his presidential kickoff in that at that county fair, the theme of his speech was states' rights, which now, but even more dramatically so when you're talking about, less than 20 years out. I mean, 15 years. I mean, it's amazing for me to contemplate this, because when I remember 1980, I was my daughter's age. And the idea of 1965 felt like a lifetime ago. But the idea of 15 years ago, to be there 15 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, to be there less than 2 decades from when those battles happened, and to announce that is just, it becomes even more stunning to me as I'm older and I realize how little amount of time 15 years is.
Sam, I'm looking at this Neshoba speech, Wikipedia, and I think the context actually was this was the first speech after he had been declared the nominee for the GOP. Okay. This was August 3rd, 1980.
It was as he launched his general election campaign.
Yeah.
So 1980 as opposed to 79. And nevertheless, same point. He is there basically proclaiming states' rights. I find it hard to believe that there aren't Republicans in the White House who are not conscious of this dynamic. I find it very hard to believe it. He's also announced that they are doing the RNC in Jacksonville. And I don't know if he's giving his speech on the day or they're just starting it on the same day that apparently, I guess it was 60 years ago, was it? The axe handle, brutality that took place there.
Axe handle Saturday.
The axe handle Saturday. And, who knows? But I would imagine someone in Jacksonville knows this. We haven't booked anything for Axe Handle Saturday. Why don't you bring the convention then? But So that's the backdrop of everything. We'll talk more about that with Ben Dixon. But here is Donald Trump being asked. Now, with this backdrop, understand, he's given a speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Friday. He is on Juneteenth. And the Jacksonville, he's giving a speech in Jacksonville on Axe Handle Saturday. Here he is being asked, why did you reference looting and shooting from 1968? He's on Fox News, one of the outnumbered folks. Here he is being asked about that, why he used that particular phrase.
Sound.
There are two more things I want to talk with you about, and you look at me, and I'm Paris on TV, but I'm a Black woman. Yeah. I'm a mom. And, and you've talked about it, but we haven't seen you come out and be that consoler in this instance. And the tweets, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Why those words?
So that's an expression I've heard over the years. And it
Do you know
really
where it comes from?
I think Philadelphia, the mayor of Philadelphia,
No,
from what
it comes from 1967. I was about 18 months old at the time. Everybody's shooting Wiki because they probably got it wrong. But it was from the chief of police in Miami. He was cracking down, and he meant what he said. And he said, I don't even care if it makes it look like brutality, I'm going to crack down when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Yeah. That frightened a lot of people when you tweeted that.
Well, it also comes from a very tough mayor who I might have been police commissioner at the time, but I think mayor of Philadelphia named Frank Rizzo. And he had an expression like that. But I've heard it many times from, I think it's been used many times. It means two things, very different things. One is if there's looting, there's probably going to be shooting. And that's not as a threat. That's really just a fact because that's what happens. And the other is if there's looting, there's going to be shooting. They're very different meanings.
Oh, interesting.
No, there's very different meanings. But I think
Do you think most people see it that way?
I think they see it both ways. No, I mean, I've had it viewed both ways. I think it's meant both ways, not by the same person. But when the looting starts, it oftentimes means there's going to be shooting, there's going to be death, there's going to be killing, and it's a bad thing. And it's also used as a threat. It's used both ways. But if you think about it, look at what happened, how people were devastated with the looting. Look at what happened.
So just to be clear, I don't know much about that Miami police chief. I know that Wallace used it in the following year or years after the Miami police chief. But I do know that Frank Rizzo's statue was taken down literally like 4 days ago in Philadelphia because he was renowned for abusing people's rights, for police brutality, for coercion, for intimidating people, for brutalizing them, particularly Black people. And so to basically, it's like, oh no, I wasn't quoting the Nazis. I was quoting the KKK is basically what his defense is.
This is from the New York Times on this Rizzo statue getting taken down. It says most of his supporters, overwhelmingly white, have also died, and his confrontational style as police commissioner and mayor is viewed as a relic of another time when he could appeal to racial resentment while trying to run for a third term as mayor by urging supporters to, quote, vote white. So.
Yeah, okay. So, but I didn't mean it. I meant it in the verb intransitive. I didn't mean that it was a consequence. I said that shooting correlates with looting, not that it's a consequence. So I can't, Twitter is just too confining for me. I can't express the nuance of what I was suggesting. One of the reasons why you don't loot is because people shoot. Not, not if
really
you
didn't
loot
do
Dixon.
the silent majority homework that much that they've
No.
been trying to pivot to through.
No. But there it is, Donald Trump using I wasn't quoting the Nazis, I was quoting the KKK defense. Got to hand it to him. Really thinking on his feet. Hey, folks, this episode, one of our sponsors, and you're going to hear a lot from them, they're sponsoring a bunch of shows. It is Sunset Lake CBD. They're located in Vermont, just outside of Burlington. It is a dairy farm. I think they're still producing dairy for Ben and Jerry's. I'm not sure. But in 2018, they started to diversify. They collaborate with the University of Vermont to practice responsible agricultural practices. Their hemp is 100% pesticide free. They only use organic fertilizer. They're a great company that uses great business practices. They have their own $15 minimum wage. The majority of the company is owned by employees, and their CBD is amazing. I have not, it's only recently that I even started to try it, but I've tried other CBD tinctures, basically for sleeping purposes. And theirs, frankly, is been incredibly effective for me. And I got a chance to use a salve. I think that somebody said salve. I don't know if that's right. Is it salve or salve? Whatever it is.
I think maybe in France it's salve.
I used it. That sounds like it would be like that in Italy, but I used it on my eczema. It's not, they don't even mention that, but I just did it because my eczema was driving me crazy on my hands. And knock on wood, I mean, I'm just telling you that it was effective. My sister had stolen my bottle for using it on her muscles. She loves it, but the tincture for me is helping me sleep in a way that I haven't had in years. Frankly, from anything other than like Ambien. They also have gummy versions of CBD, but they have smokable CBD. Look at this. I mean, it looks like my daughter thought she had bagged me. But Matt, who is a CBD skeptic in terms of smoking, you've been raving about this stuff.
Yeah, and I went from skeptic to consumer. I basically have gone through the entire stash that since they sent me. So yeah, really good, pleasant stuff. If you don't like don't want to get paranoid smoking other things, you just want a nice calming effect, I think this is where you go.
They also got a CBD coffee, so you can check all this out and you can get 20% off. They're fans of the shows, and they said they wanted to use the promo code Left is Best, and I was like, awesome. And so it's Left is Best, one word, 20% off at sunsetlakecbd.com. Sunsetlakecbd.com. Check it out. I think you're going to be very happy you did. Lastly, a lot of folks shopping online these days, obviously. We want to stay away maybe from some major aggregators of online shopping. When you do, there's an easy way to make sure that you're not missing the coupon codes. The coupon codes are all over the place, and I used to make my daughter sit down and search for coupon codes when she buys stuff. But thanks to Honey, you no longer have to actually manually search for coupon codes. Honey is a free browser extension that finds promo codes for you, automatically applies them to your cart. So, for instance, I just asked Mila, I said, what? Because she's using Honey, which means that I'm using Honey because I am saving money because she is saving money. I said, what was the last thing you bought that Honey saved you money? She immediately was like, Ulta. I don't know what Ulta is. I think it's like a beauty. She said she was buying makeup or some type of like facial cream. She saved $4, $15 to $11. She tells me, and did nothing. And I can guarantee you, if she was not using that, I would have paid $15 for whatever that stuff was that she bought. Honey has found its over 17 million members, over $2 billion worth in savings. It supports over 30,000 stores online. including DoorDash, Lululemon, Walmart. And I can tell my kids to look for coupons, savings online, or I don't have to worry about it because put Honey extension in our browser. If you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out on free money. It's literally free and installs in a few seconds. And by getting it, you're doing yourself a solid and you're supporting this podcast. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/majority. joinhoney.com/majority. That's joinhoney.com/majority. All right. Don't forget, you can also support this show by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get the fun half and you get the free half free of commercials. So check that out. All right. Do we have Ben?
Yep, here he comes.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you in all his video glory, the host and proprietor of the Benjamin Dixon Show, Ben
Sam
Dixon himself. Hello, Ben.
Hey, Sam, how are you? I guess this is my first time doing video with you, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's great to see you. And nice SMB. What is that? It's the SMB 7 you got going there.
Yeah, that's the one, man. It's the standard.
Do you need to power that up? Do you need to power?
Yeah, you have to. Well, you don't have to power it up per se, but you do have to have a one of the cloud lifts to amplify, like a preamp to get the signal. Otherwise, it's super quiet.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
that's been a problem in the past for me with that. I don't know why, but that's maybe I got to get on that. Maybe I got to upgrade my microphone. Ben, I'm glad you're with us today. Obviously, every day now seems like it was like
a year
ago, but it also, it's I can't even tell like when one day starts and another one ends. But there was an election, primary election, if you could call it that, I guess, Georgia this week, and it was a crap show. Yeah. So particularly, it was a crap show in the number of machines that did not work specifically in the Black communities, and the amount of time that people had to wait. There were some people waiting in line till midnight. Had some reports that police officers had to come and tell people it's time to go because it was quote unquote private property. But that's how long people waited in line. The polls opened at 7 a.m. Tuesday, and the people who were in line at 7 did not get the chance to vote until after 9 o'clock because the machines kept breaking in. Somehow they only broke in minority communities, predominantly Black communities versus suburban communities and white communities. I mean, obviously, look, Georgia has a long history of vote suppression. Kemp, there's a lot of people who feel that Stacey Abrams,
would be governor.
Were it not for I think there's a very good reason to believe that this was sort of like a dry run for how you're going to run it on in November, right? I mean, they don't necessarily care who wins the Democratic primary, but they want to see like, what's the tolerance for this, right? And apparently it's quite high. Like, is there anything happening on this court?
That's the thing. So there are people who are organizing now to address what happened. But that's the problem. It's not enough, right? There's not a full court press from the Democratic Party here. There's not a full court press from the national Democrats. And apparently the tolerance is very high. You even had in some of the local races, I mean, you had a higher turnout than usual, than you would suspect in a pandemic. You still had a significant number of Black people show up to the polls, but still, because of the amount of time that they had to wait, a lot of them didn't get an opportunity to vote. So I agree with you. I think this is a dry run for November because Georgia, if you actually just look at the demographics, if you look at the registration, Georgia is pretty blue. And I think that they're doing everything that they can. It's obvious that they're doing everything they can to keep it red as possible.
I mean, the thing that's really frustrating about this too is that unlike, voter ID, right, where activists can see that there's a problem. Okay, they're requiring voter ID, and there's no. They've shut the DMV down in Black communities, and people can actually get out there and say, like, we're going to do a campaign.
Organize around
We're going to
that.
drive
Right.
people there. We're going to get people IDs. We're going to help them, this and that.
Right.
If it's a problem of voting places and it's a problem of voting machines, well, there's not much that the activists can do without going through the legislature, it seems.
Right. And really, because it's happening, it's the day of, right? A lot of times we've seen it in the past where you show up, you have a problem with voting, they give you a provisional ballot, and then there's all type of games that could be played with those provisional ballots. But the scale of this, Sam, is the biggest problem, right? The scale, there's simply not enough activists, there are not enough organizers, there's not enough attorneys who can be at all of these locations to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to vote. And when the problem is malfunctioning machines, it literally is everyone stands around until they figure out how to get the machines working. But again, they didn't have these problems in the non-Black communities.
And is there vote by mail in Georgia?
Yes, there's vote by mail. But one big thing happened. A lot of people requested ballots, and those ballots never came. And so they ended up having to go to the polls anyway on election day and waiting in line. So there's all kinds of things games that are going on in the state of Georgia. And again, it is a concerted effort to keep Georgia red because it has been trending blue. Every election has been trending bluer and bluer. And the increase in African-American turnout this time around really suggests that it's a threat to the Republican control in the state.
Let's talk a little bit about and so I don't know, the frustrating thing is like, I don't know what else there is to say at this point, but that's also part of the problem, right? It's like there's these sort of just these roadblocks that are there that unless like there are federal standards for vote by mail,
right?
Which,
I think one of the things, Sam, don't mean to cut you off, but one of the things that could happen that we don't see happening is the full court press from Democrats, right? I mean, this should be, honestly, it should be everything that's talked about. This is all people should be talking about right now in terms of the Democratic Party. And I think what happens so often is that most of the motion that we see, most of the momentum that we see in this country really comes from the activists, right? The people who are on the ground, and then people in independent media and social media, right? We create the stir, and without us actively creating the stir, nothing is happening around this. So I really am wondering, like, what is going on with the power of the Democratic Party infrastructure? Like, why are they not on the front lines using all that energy that they use to stop Bernie Sanders to leverage that same power to bring it to bear to stop the Republicans from suppressing the vote? I don't get that part.
Well, I don't think they have the same power to do that. But didn't we hear a lot about Obama and Holder? We're going to go out with, millions of dollars of resources and be suing everybody. I mean, as far as I can tell,
as far as we can tell, there's no real action.
That's
there.
Ended. They filed some suits in Ohio. I mean, maybe they're more active than.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, so if they're active at this point, it's the public pressure, right? So if they are active, there needs to be a lot more publicity around it, because we see things really change when the national consensus, when the minds of the masses start to be changed on an issue, but also just have something brought to their attention. I mean, that's literally how everything happened over the last couple of weeks. It was social media exposing the video of George Floyd that actually catapulted everything into action. And so if they are out there working, they need to publicize the hell out of it.
Right. And part of it is, I would imagine, is that what happened in Georgia is competing for attention with what's happening around the country in terms of the protests, in terms of like the idea of changing the way that we police, the way police operate, broadly and particularly in regards to the Black community. Give me your sense of just like how, like, it's hard to imagine we would have this type of movement. I'm going to talk more with David Roth, who's written a great piece about how the consensus of policing has radically changed, it seems to me, over the course of a month. And, so much so that even Republicans are, at the very least, pretending to be out there looking for police reform.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest victory out of the last month. Of course, the charges against the officers in the case of George Floyd, that's a victory. We're looking to get charges brought up against the police officers who shot and killed Breonna Taylor as she slept in her home. They were executing a no-knock warrant, and they went to the wrong house and killed 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. Go ahead.
Louisville just passed a ban on no-knock warrants
right
in the wake of that.
Right. So, I mean, and that is most certainly a victory, and shout out to all the activists on the ground there, the organizers who actually they really pressed hard to make that happen. Those officers are still at large, though. They're still, if I'm not mistaken, some of them are still working. So we're still trying to get justice in that regard. But one of the big victories over the last 2 weeks came at a very high cost. I want to start by saying the cost of this victory, right? The change in the minds of the American people with regard to who the police are. It came at a really high cost. A couple of people died. People lost their vision, lost sight. They got shot in the face with rubber bullets. The young woman who died because of exposure to tear gas. There's a lot of people who, and we don't even know the unseen cost at this point of people who were infected with COVID-19. We may never really know how much it cost for the American people to see just how vicious the police state really is. And something I said on my show for years, Sam, is like, and I usually address this towards libertarians. Like, libertarians really do believe in the police state, but they always scoff when we talk about the police state in the Black community. But I always said on my show that the police state, which started and was their craft was honed in the Black community, was always going to spill over eventually. And that's what we saw last week. I mean, we saw them beating old white men. We saw them beating middle-aged, middle-income white women on television. And I think that was something that really shook the American consciousness. And so now there's a level of suspicion with which we look at police officers that Black folks have been trying to tell y'all about for a long time, but that's cool. I'm glad we're finally getting to the point where American can see the police for what they have always been in the Black community.
Well, what do you make of the? I'm trying to compare their response to what we saw during Occupy, and we saw some of that behavior during Occupy.
Yeah.
But it seemed almost their response seemed to be, almost like very cohesive, city to city to city.
Yeah.
And even more violent than at that time. And I don't think I'm imagining that. I remember incidents in New York City, but they're during Occupy, and obviously out the West Coast, Oakland during Occupy. But it seems like across the country, the response has been much more violent by police.
Yeah.
What do you think that's a function of? Do you think that just like it's another 10 years and this has been the trajectory of police? Do you think it's a function of just like there's a, that quality of like it's Rudy's time type of attitude? I mean, what do you think it is?
I actually think it's both of those things, Sam. I think this has been the trajectory. We saw the escalation. Two things. We saw the escalation specifically during Ferguson, right? That was the first time we saw that large scale escalation where they were suppressing the press. I remember a whole thread of a reporter who was at McDonald's and got arrested in Ferguson, right? So it has been escalating, and this has been the natural trend. And you got to think about it, right? They are ever escalating in terms of what they spend their money on and the type of training and the type of militarization that they have been growing over the last 10 years. So I'm not surprised in the escalation, but then I think there's also another factor. This was a direct response to the police and a direct call for the police to be defunded, and they felt like this was an attack on their authorities. And so, of course, as soon as the mayors, that's the other thing I always have to point out, none of this went on without these Democratic mayors knowing about it, signing off on it, or turning a blind eye to it, however you want to say it. Bill de Blasio is just as culpable as anybody else. Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, she's just as culpable as anyone else. I don't care how many people they fire. There's not one rubber bullet that was fired that a Democratic mayor didn't know about. And so it was both an affront. It was natural escalation. This is where we've always been going, an affront to the police authority. But it was also the fact that we were protesting not only police violence, but the police state in general, which is a direct threat to the ruling class.
So what do you think happens now? I mean, the Democrats have put out a list of police reforms, all of which I think are necessary, but broadly speaking, significantly insufficient.
Yes.
I mean, I think and I should say there's also this sort of ancillary argument, like, Bernie Sanders put out a set of reforms himself. He specifically shied away from the defund, semantics. But if you look in his proposals, he is proposing limiting funds for cops and building sort of like parallel institutions and personnel who would take much of the cops' portfolio essentially and deal with it, whether it's unhoused folks or folks suffering from any type of mental issues or and so on, and obviously decriminalization of drugs.
Yeah.
Give me your sense of just sort of like where it goes from here. I mean, what do you think that should be done? I mean, bank these reforms and essentially like try and push forward. I mean, inevitably, it seems to me there's going to be some momentum loss as soon as you do that. But at the same time, there's going to be momentum loss anyways, because next week we're due to be invaded by the aliens, and people are going to be focused on that.
Yeah, no, honestly, that I agree with you. Like I'm fully expecting an asteroid to hit. It won't be a big enough asteroid to kill everybody, but it's going to be enough to be a natural progression in 2020. But to your point, I think one of the things that has to happen is that we continue using the power of social media. And I know this doesn't sound like much, but I want to show how significant it can be. I never really expected for us to successfully defund the police because of this incident. Certainly did not expect for us to be able to abolish the police because of this incident. But I do believe that we have won the narrative and that we can continue to win the narrative and change the minds of the American people. I think one of the most powerful things we can get from this is a general suspicion of police instead of a general belief that police are good. Right. When a police officer stood on a stand and to testify against a defendant, people always looked at that police officer as honorable and noble because he wore a badge. Now we see them as pigs. I've always seen them as pigs, but a lot of people just have a general distrust of the police officers now at this point, and that's what we need because that's what they deserve. They don't deserve the free for all in terms of granting them and ceding them nobility, right? That's how they've leveraged it against us. And so if we can hit some strategic milestones here, in terms of the funding, what the Democrats are offering is just woefully insufficient, right? They're talking about not webcams, but body cams. They're talking about banning the chokehold and things that have been like in New York, I think it was 1993 where they banned the chokehold, but they still do it. And so I don't think we're going to get the victory we want in terms of defunding the police, but I think we can get the victory we need in terms of changing the national consensus around the integrity of the police.
Yeah, that's important. It's no longer a sacrosanct type of thing, and I mean, on some level, there has to be some type of undercutting of their political and
power
and institutional power, and so that in the next step after that's achieved is to actually begin to sort of just shrink them as an institution.
Right, and I think those steps have to come. Like we really have to just outlive these people like Jim Clyburn, Nancy Pelosi, and this entire generation that signed off on the 94 crime bill. Like they are entrenched in power. We got to get them out of power. And once we get them out of there, I think there's a whole generation of people who have a totally different mindset with regard to police. And we just have to continue and not throw in the towel. But the number one thing that we gain ground on, we cannot let up on. And that is changing the national consensus about the behavior of police across this country.
That's the generational thing, and I know that I probably am guilty of investing maybe too much into this, but I am convinced, and I say that only because I hesitate to put too much. I don't want to invest too much in that because it creates a sense of like there's both an inevitability and a futility of pushing it past a certain point. But
I feel that.
I really do think that what we're seeing is the emergence of millennials who, we have two big generations that are basically on the court, as it were, right now on the playing field. And that's boomers and millennials. And Gen Xers like myself, I didn't grow up at a time I didn't grow up at a time where I saw the need for a Civil Rights Act or a Voting Rights Act, or the stopping of like literally government programs that were racially discriminatory. I mean, these things all existed almost up to the point where I was born, but I didn't grow up with the existence of these things. My attitudes are definitely different towards Black people and society's relationship with Black people and brown people and women for that matter, and gay people. But they were diminished, I guess, sort of the worst of it was diminished from generations before me. But my generation was too small to impact any change whatsoever. We were always living in the boomers culture.
Yeah.
And I think we're at like a tipping point where millennials, it's their culture.
Yeah.
They're the citizens, they're the consumers. They have the most cultural power. They have the most political power, not quite political power, but they have the most cultural power at this point.
Yeah, but they're gaining that political power.
Yes, and they're gaining that political power. They're not quite there yet, but they have the most cultural power, it seems to me. And that's why obviously we have this greater context in which this stuff is happening, but their response seems to be driving this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I'm right there on the cusp, like right there. I'm both a millennial as well as Gen X, like right there at 1980, and I agree. Like part of my life was living in the shadow of boomers but having a suspicion that something was wrong. Right, we kind of grew up in a period where everybody pretended like everything was fine. 1992, when we saw Rodney King being beat, like that was one of the first major cultural shifts in that generation, right? And now we're living in a generation where we see that every day, like every single day, we see 2 or 3 Rodney Kings happening on a regular basis. So millennials, people who were like solidly millennial, they grew up with wars. They grew up with clear examples of corrupt politicians and the Supreme Court snatching away a victory from in 2000. Like they grew up with 2 recessions, now a pandemic. Like Zoomers and millennials, I can't wait till I see a time when they look at me and call me a conservative, right? I'm not going to change my politics. I'm going to get a little bit more radical as I get older, but the younger generation, they're going to look at us and be like, you guys are just milquetoast conservatives. And I think in general, that's a good thing because of how far right this country has shifted over the last generation or 2. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that happens to me already on some level. And I like I say, I welcome it. I mean, it's pretty awesome to see. And it's awesome to see how that perspective on cops has changed dramatically. I mean, to the point where even a Democratic Party, which is in many respects dominated by boomers, literally, and certainly still dominated by the boomer mentality. Yeah. And I don't want to offend people who are boomers who are listening to this. I mean, I understand it. Like, I'm talking about overall the generation, my generation was also very Reagan oriented. Yes. So I'm not too happy with Gen Xers in that regard too. I don't think you necessarily, because you're a boomer, this is your disposition, but I'm saying I think like Ryan Grimm's book, really the thesis of it is that many of the leaders today learned their lessons in politics from the early 90s and in the wake of the Reagan era. And that is what I'm talking about. That is that was sort of the consensus for that generation. There's also the consensus, I think, for my generation as well.
But that's the difference between like that's the difference between the Pete Buttigieg of the world, where he came in like he's a generation too late, like he's an election cycle too late. He grew up with that kind of training and that mentality of being a more progressive sounding Ronald Reagan, when in reality the Gen X and younger Gen Xers and millennials and Zoomers are like, absolutely the hell not. That time is gone. So they missed the boat on that one.
Let's talk about Donald Trump is going to be giving a speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma next weekend on Juneteenth. Yeah. I mean, they had to know, right?
Oh,
Like,
of
I don't
course.
think they're terribly sophisticated, but they had to know.
Oh no, that's the point, man. The cruelty is the point. It's always the point. They're trying to rub it in. And they know. I don't know if you were about to say a whole lot more there.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the cruelty is the point. They are rubbing it in, but here I'm not so upset about it so much as we have to understand the real agenda here. When he goes to Tulsa, and he does it on Juneteenth, he's going to be flanked by Black people. Right. He's going to be flanked by Black preachers and all the people who he has on his payroll to make sure that he doesn't look as racist as his dog whistles sound. Right. So he's going to be doing two things at once. He's going to be dog whistling to his audience that, hey, I own this Black holiday, this city that was ravaged by the Tulsa race massacre, where they killed hundreds of Black people and devastated an entire thriving, booming Black community in 1921. He said, I own this, and his supporters are going to love it. But at the same time, he's going to try to walk the tightrope of co-opting Blackness and trying to bring it over into the column of protecting this white male Christian power structure in this country. So that's the job of Stephen Miller. He's writing the speech. So the real question is can Stephen Miller get over his natural lust for white supremacy enough to help Donald Trump walk that tightrope where he can try to convince he's trying to convince Black people that the real way to be Black is to support his type of ideologies?
I feel like Miller, I think he can get into the right mind frame if he just can convince himself that this appeasement of Black people is in service of white supremacy.
Oh yeah,
that he'll be able to fashion something that would work. The other interesting thing to note on that day is he's also forcing people to sign a waiver,
right?
Oklahoma, I don't think has a particular problem, but, he is going to go to Arizona, and Arizona, it's conceivable within a couple of weeks is going to bust through their threshold of what their hospitals can contain.
Can handle. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Brendan, do we have that clip of, I think it was in Arizona. I don't know if it was a state official who.
The public health official.
Yeah. Public health official. Look at this. Let's play this. This is sort of stunning. Like, all the flattening of the curve was really about making sure that we did not have deaths that were a function of not being able to provide medical care for them because there was so many people coming into the hospital. And they are racing towards that precipice. This is what their public health official had to say.
We have halted elective surgeries and allowed facilities to request exemptions from that executive order, and we have issued a stay-at-home order. And the goal for those mitigation strategies was really to slow the spread so that we could ensure that we had adequate hospital capacity. We know that it's in the community. We are not going to be able to stop the spread, and so we can't stop living as well.
In other words, we're just going to see what happens, basically. It really is stunning to me. There's the anti-science push that we saw during the Bush years is really, in many respects, coming home to roost.
It's on the next level, Sam. The idea that the way we have decided in America to deal with this pandemic is to we're going to absorb the brunt of it, right? And that we are at 115,000 people who are dead already, and at this rate, we're probably going to see closer to 250,000 probably before this year is over, and that's a lowball estimate. It is a level of ignorance and stupidity that is embraced by so many people in this country that we can't negate it. We can't just dismiss it and laugh at them anymore. During the Bush era, we laughed at their stupidity, right? Now we can't afford to laugh at their stupidity because their stupidity is about to get a lot of people killed.
But it's not just stupidity. It is a willful ignorance.
It's weaponized. It's weaponized
It is a
ignorance.
weaponized ignorance, exactly. Like, look, we definitely cannot be in lockdown for however long this is going to exist. But the idea that wearing a mask has become some type of God's guns and deficit, whatever it is, some
Yes.
type of signifier for the right is just absurd.
Right.
Like the cost of wearing a mask is so
negligible.
low.
Right.
And it is the one thing that people can do that can really genuinely mitigate the chances of other people catching it.
Right. Right.
And the idea, and it costs virtually nothing.
Right. Well, the masks are starting to cost a little bit more. I saw a package of 50 for $50. I'm like, okay, you got to love capitalism.
Right.
But in terms of like your social costs, it costs nothing. And in fact, like if they were serious about opening the economy again safely, then everyone would say, okay, we can reduce transmission significantly by everybody wearing a mask, but that's not good enough, right? It's because whose article was that? I think it was Ryan Cooper's article about them making the culture war. They turned this into the culture war.
Yeah.
Wearing a mask is a part of the culture war at this point. And because of that, they are willing, they're literally willing to die on behalf of this new virtue signal that they have inside of their own culture war. And it's funny how they always throw virtue signaling at us, but now they're virtue signaling in a way that's going to get them killed. And they're going to sign a waiver to go to these rallies.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't know. So it is, I agree with you. It's weaponized ignorance, but it's at a level that's going to cost so many innocent lives.
And let me also be clear here. You don't need to buy a mask. You can cut up an old t-shirt. You can cut up and still, you can still protect other people by wearing that. Is that effective? No, but is it 60% more effective? That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and I didn't want to touch on this in this moment, but screw it. I'm seeing a lot of people, and some on the left or ostensibly on the left, who are, there's a this growing streak of left contrarianism of people saying what's going on with the idea that you can go to protests,
right?
But coming out or demanding that we open up our economies and whatnot are not equivalent. And I want to get your take on this, but let me just plant this flag. First off, those people on the who are pushing for the economy to come out, those people in Michigan with their showing up with their guns, and the people who did it in California, they are, to push their point, they are in denial as to the reality of COVID.
Right.
They are not going and saying we're equally weighing these things and we're looking clear-headed at these two things. And one is real and the other is also real, but this one outweighs that. And we're going to do everything we can to mitigate the COVID as we do this. Whereas the protesters, they're out there, the vast majority of them wearing masks.
Yeah.
The cops aren't, but the vast majority of the protesters are. They're not denying the reality of COVID. They're simply saying, this is so compelling that I am willing to risk what I know is a real danger to go out and do this. Whereas the other people start with the denial of COVID. Right. They say this is something that is being foisted on us. Mm-hmm. And then they say, and I want my, liberty to not wear a mask. This is absurd that you could make an equivalence here. It is a blight on science. It is a blight on, even if you don't get to the point of it's fighting this injustice is more important than being able to go get a haircut. You don't even have to get there to make a valid critique of what these people are arguing by saying COVID's not real. Therefore, you're just trying to control me by forcing me to wear a mask.
Well, Sam, that's because there's disingenuous actors, and I don't say that in terms of a platitude. I know everyone understands that there's a lot of bad faith actors out there, but the power of bad faith arguments is one where they try to neutralize the protest in our mind, right? They're really trying to convince us that we're the same as the people who are out there trying to open up their business by denying that COVID even exists, right? They want to nullify, they want to neutralize everyone's righteous indignation, and the way they do that that is they have to draw an equivalence between their anger and our anger. Their anger that says you're violating my liberties because you're making me wear a mask, versus our anger that says stop killing us. And the people who are doing this are not only conservatives, but there's some people in the so-called left. We all know who we're talking about. We won't call any names, but there's a lot of them, right? And so this is the thing that I've had to stress significantly and expend a lot of social capital on, is by convincing people that your protests are valid. Right? Because it's the number one thing they're trying to do. They're trying to say you're no better than the people who are out here trying to open up their restaurants. No, I don't care if I get any Dave and Buster's or any chicken wings. These people are sacrificing their lives and their safety on behalf of a problem that they feel is so significant that their lives are worth risking for it. Like, you cannot draw equivalence between those people and their righteous indignation and the angry people over there. So we have to stop letting them draw that equivalence. Righteous indignation is what's driving us, and just pure opportunistic anger is what's driving them.
And I am happy to entertain that argument if they're going to be sincere about what it is.
Right.
i.e., getting a haircut is the equivalent of fighting against police brutality, and that in addition, they also have to embrace the attitude that those people have, that COVID is overblown, and that this is a fiction, or at least its danger is fictionalized.
But they can't say that.
Well, that's right. And there's a lot of, like, I gotta say, and there's people I've lost a tremendous amount of respect for, not because of their positions, but because of how disingenuous they are in presenting it.
Yeah, that's when I jump off the boat, man. Like, I can't, like, once I realize that you are willing to argue in bad faith just to preserve your posturing, your brand, like you're no good to the entire conversation at this point.
Ben Dixon,
Michael Tracy.
What's it?
Never mind.
No, fuck Michael Tracy. I'm not like, I don't even like, he doesn't even reach the bar of me ever having any type of respect for the guy. I'm sorry. I didn't even I wouldn't. My voice is too damaged to waste any time even discussing his bullshit. Ben Dixon, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoy it. Folks can check out the Benjamin Dixon Show, and I can't press upon them enough to do so. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Be safe up there.
Talk to you soon. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, this is just amazing how much content we actually produce every day. What great commentators and writers. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program the former writer from Deadspin, and now writing, wherever like major publications can corral him. Writing a couple of pieces in the New Republic. David Roth, welcome to the program.
It looks like he's still transitioning between the waiting room and live. So
that sounds like a science fiction.
Oh, here he is.
This is an elaborate bit we cooked up.
There we go.
Hello,
David Roth. Welcome to the program. Now, are you freelance writing these days?
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to say it.
Okay, fair enough. Then that's the way I'll say it.
Right.
There are two pieces that you wrote just in the past couple of days of the New Republic, which I thought were fantastic.
Thanks.
But first off, welcome. I don't know if you heard my first welcome to you, because you were apparently transitioning from the waiting room into the...
Yeah, I was, there's a rigorous vetting process that basically involved me having to quit Zoom a bunch of times, but here I am.
Well, we're following the New York City DOE protocols to make sure that nobody interferes with our Zoom calls, and that's why we've got to be very stringent. But let's start. I want to start. I hope you're well and making your way through this.
As well as can be expected, I guess.
Yeah. All right.
I had my second haircut of quarantine. We're adapting. We're doing what we can.
Someone else did it for you, or did you do it yourself?
My wife did it, and did a pretty good job, I think. There's one little like nibble here that that was the first thing she did that took it down to like that.
I still have mine over here from when I think my daughter, I don't know which side it is. My daughter, it took a huge chunk out, and then I was like, you know what, maybe I'll do this. But I just did my son's haircut, and it came out pretty well. I'm using like shears and
wow. Yeah, these were just like the crappy beard trimmer that I had, and it was sort of like, I don't know, both of us got mildly high and thought we'd experiment, like play with my look. See what happens.
Well, you look very dapper.
Thanks,
I appreciate you. I'm glad that we have you on video for this. You wrote a piece, The Twilight of the Cop Consensus, and I thought it was a really good piece. I want to let me read just a little bit. I rarely do this, but there was a couple of things that you wrote that I think really capture this. And I spoke a little bit about this with Ben Dixon early in the program, but I think this is really sort of I'm really fascinated by this because I think we're going to see this moment, what happened here, play out in a couple of other areas. It's important to recognize, you wrote, that the emerging movement to defund police forces is about more than that particular laudable goal. More fundamentally, it's about reversing the dereliction that left states and cities spending more than half their budgets on harm infliction and the meager rest on literally everything else. Seen from this vantage, the rationale for the exorbitant funding of the police stems from their de facto mandate to manage the fallout from the many other challenges that the state has effectively chosen not to address. That's at the heart, in many respects, of at least the solution that what we talk about with defunding, which is an analogous problem that we have with teaching, and I would argue probably across the board in many areas, which is we have these societal ills. Instead of addressing them directly, what we do is we, at least in terms of the cops and in terms of the teachers, we expect them to deal with it. We don't necessarily fund them to deal with it.
Yeah.
But with the cops, we just throw a bunch of money in there and basically say, sweep this under the rug. And apparently they decide to do it in the most violent way possible.
It's I think that's a good distinction that you're making there too, because it's like I'm for obvious reasons, like it's hard to, like, I don't want to make myself like the center of the movement to defund the police for any particular reason or whatever. But it's seeing that dynamic that you just described play out over and over again in terms of, like, it's not even a less expensive way of doing it. It's just a more violent way of doing it. But that it's like to see like what happens when you've got one party that vehemently wants the government not to work, and then you have another one that sees its job as mitigating that process instead of actually stopping it or reversing it. And, so this is what you get. Like, this is what it takes to keep people pacified when you have taken from them everything that they believe their tax dollars are paying for.
That was actually the second quote that I had. And the last one was, the inevitable outcome of the unspoken and unexamined political consensus that the job of the state is to make sure both that the right people are protected and the right people get hurt. Conservatives actually actively work to enhance it. Liberals have accepted that their job is to try and mitigate it. Actually, remaking it was, until very recently, not part of the conversation. And now it is.
Yeah.
And why do you think it is now as opposed to, I don't know, 5 years ago?
It's hard to figure that part out. I mean, I think the video, you can see why people got in the streets because of the George Floyd thing. Like, it really is as horrible as any image could be. And as like, as sort of like a crystalline expression of like what that type of policing really does do to people, like, and communities. I think the thing that sort of has triggered this response in, that has like opened up these sort of like broader avenues of discussion is like, comes down to how much the cops fucked up in responding to these protests, how like hyper aggressive and violent and ineffective it was. I mean, that's the other sort of, there's reasons, that we can, I don't even know if it qualifies as speculation, why like a bunch of cops were standing in Times Square waiting to hit polluters with batons while like 5 blocks east, they're looting, the Louis Vuitton store on Fifth Avenue. Like that, it's clear that if they wanted to stop that looting, they could have done more to do it. They didn't.
Right.
That was, whether that was a strategic decision or not. I think it's just like to see all of these different failures happening concurrently, the pandemic, policing, that like the basic enforcing of order in a way that doesn't look like a boot on a neck. Like every bit of that has failed at the same time. And I think that that's like the feeling in the streets. I don't want to make it seem like I'm out protesting all the time or, you know, whatever, throwing a garbage can through the window of Sal's Pizza or whatever. Like I've done my little bits of marching and like, you know, but I feel like people have come to the realization that this shit just isn't working and that the people in charge on both sides are not capable of making it work. And so seeing where that, you know, sort of frustration goes is going to be the interesting part. But it's already heartening, I think, to see that it's not going in the directions that Republicans have traditionally tried to channel it. That it's not the sort of thing where it's like, just find some, you know, marginalized community to take the shit out on and demand a tax cut when you're done. Like, I think people want not to live like this.
I mean, Ben made this point, and obviously your piece makes this point that that what has changed, at least in the in the past month. I mean, obviously, like these things sort of build up over time, and then there's almost like a spike in the way that, and that's the way, I feel like everything happens is that there's a spike, then it drops down, but to a baseline that is not where the old baseline was.
Right. And
that is that the institution of the police is problematic in a way that it wasn't sort of recognized before. And that, like you say, people are starting to contemplate remaking, and we've seen it in the response from the Democratic Party. I mean, 15 years ago, I know how the Democrats would have responded to this. They would have just sounded like the Republicans, as much as they could, like you say, but with some mitigation. But it would have been, they would have fallen there. They would have still been sort of enthralled by that law and order. And as ham-fisted and as I think, not up to the task of the reform that's needed, they did dress in their outfits and kneel, which at the very least, and I do mean it's the very least they could do.
Yeah.
But it was like their way. I mean, I saw this clip of like this meme where someone said like, I told mom that, I was having a black friend over. And so they dress up like that. Completely not capable of rising to the moment, but some notion of like not running away from it in the way that they used to before.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame I think that's exactly right. It's a shame that that's where the bar is at this point, that it's like whatever, grandma doing some like sort of cringe gesture, like whatever, right. dressing like fucking Professor X from the X Clan and like, hitting the kneel. But at the same time, it shows that they, as difficult as it would be for the highest ranking Democrat elected officials to recognize this, because they're all like 73 years old and have 4 homes, so it's like there's only so much you can really get through to them. It's clear that like they have at least seen that this is not going away. And I think that your point about where the plateau is, that this is like maybe where we're taking off from after Ferguson, right? That like this is because there was a Democratic president and there was a DOJ that was not dedicated to doing the opposite of what the DOJ is supposed to do. So like those are some differences from the time that we're in now. But like what that gave us was like this spate of police reforms and all that like kind of 8 can't wait shit where it's you come up with new rules and new sort of forms to fill out, all the sort of technocratic liberal responses to things. And, so some departments adhered to that, like all of them grudgingly. Yeah.
Minneapolis was one.
7 of the
like
8 can't wait things.
I mean, that was, that's on some level, that's really helpful that they did that because we just ran the experiment. And if you're a technocrat, you got to look at the data and guess what? Didn't work.
Yeah.
Got to do something different.
And this is, I think, what goes back to what you were saying about in terms of like, as corny as it is to see like Chuck Schumer in kente cloth, like sort of it like at the very least that can't be where it ends. Like even they, I think, realize that like throwing more rules and new sort of like, half a loaf type solutions to like massive institutional abuses is not like that's not it. Like, it won't move the needle. And it also, like you said, like, we already know what it does, which is basically like departments either ignore it or scoff at it, or they find, like, as Minneapolis did, like, just new ways to commit new abuses. I was reading a story from the Star Tribune earlier today that they apparently for years, cops would just get EMTs to inject people with ketamine, like, just to calm them down. They would sedate them with stuff, which is, and, you know, like, no consent from, obviously, from the people. Most of them were having sort of mental health emergencies, but they weren't, in many cases, they weren't even being arrested. And the cops would just be like, do you mind dosing this person? They're annoying me. Like, just incredible shit.
I mean, I think the one of the things that, you know, was a debate in Occupy was that came out of one of the subcommittees on essentially proposing new financial regulations, and the document that they produced was considered to be like significantly better than any think tank produced, et cetera, et cetera. Was this concept of, you know, we can either try and do these sort of surgical regulations on the banking industry, or we can take a meat cleaver and just basically, you know, make sure that there's no room. We don't need those surgical things. Yeah. We're gonna cut off part of the whatever. We're gonna cut off part of the arm. We're gonna cut off the arm so that we're not playing around with the gangrene. Let's put it that way.
Or instead of coming up with new things that you can do with your arm.
Exactly.
It's like whatever, like a hand checking rule in the NBA or whatever. That, like, I think that's like the real.
And I think we're about to see the failure of the not cutting off the arm.
Yeah.
Because the gangrene has returned.
Yep. And
they did new things, and it's not going to be CDOs, but it could be these, like, basically these junk bonds that corporations have. They're over leveraged. I mean, we may end up seeing that, but the point being is that I feel like we're entering into an era where there is going to be increased awareness that these surgical fixes are just simply not working. Yeah. You know, even on their own terms, you have to sort of, like, even if you're a technocrat, and I have no problem with technocrats, but look at the data. You've run your experiment. It didn't work.
Right. And so that's like, and that's a real sort of a challenging thing, I think, for a party that, especially, like, I mean, Obama was like the apotheosis of this because he's like the closest thing to an actual smart guy that's been president during my lifetime. Right. But that, like, they had all these, like, clever ideas that they sort of seemingly, you know, wherever you could implement them, that they chose, like, the most sort of clever, subtle response to things, not all of which are, like, objectionable on their merits. It's just like, they don't do the job as well as some of the, like, dumb, obvious, this is illegal and you can't do it now measures. Right. The same way, you know, whatever with healthcare, it's the same deal that, like, you create an exchange and you create all these incentives and tax breaks and you nudge people in various directions or other. But, like, you can also just fucking give them the healthcare and take all that stuff off the table. And, like, while that is kind of like oafish and old fashioned and, like, you know, Lyndon Johnson-y, it also would have the added benefit of conferring healthcare to individuals.
Let me, and I ask this at the risk of, and I certainly don't want to, I don't want to, turn the page on this moment in terms of what we're doing in terms of police reform, particularly in the context of the Black community. But we're also on the precipice. I don't know if we're 3 weeks away or 5 weeks away or 8 weeks away from really what's happened to the economy is really going to start to land. On some level, I feel like the tide has been out, or it's like that moment before the tsunami where the water comes out and goes, well, it's really pleasant. Everything seems to be very quiet right now. It's weird. And all of a sudden, I think, like, we can start to see the water coming back in, and, you know, we're going to see unemployment benefits run out in, I think, about 5 or 6 weeks. We're going to start to see these moratoriums on evictions are ending across the country. Colorado tried to extend theirs. No luck. We're going to start to see austerity heading into now Q3. We're going to start to see austerity in state and local governments across the board. And I think we're going to start to see real pain. I mean, it's not like we haven't, but I think what we've had now is anxiety and anticipation of real pain. People have lost their jobs. They've been slow to get maybe, unemployment benefits, but they had this sense that it was coming. But now the sense is it's ending.
Yeah.
And states are going to start cutting back on their services. It's a great time to cut back on the cops right now, frankly. And then, when it comes time for refunding, you refund other places. But it does not appear like we're going to get a federal bill anytime before then. What do you think happens with this energy? And how much of is it a problem to sort of I can't help but think on some level, like the energy is going to migrate, but it's also, I have mixed feelings about that, because we're at a moment where we can actually get genuine reform, maybe in this sort of silo of policing. But the amount of pain is going to sort of widen and shift. Yeah. And, a lot of it's going to hit the Black community in terms of evictions. It's going to hit low income communities. It's going to hit brown communities.
Basically everybody that, suffers the most from over policing, bad policing, is going to suffer from all of the other shit too. Yeah.
And COVID for that matter, and the ones who lost their jobs in this instance.
So it's hard to, say obviously where it's going to go, but I think that there is this sense that it all fits into the same critique and into the same sort of structure, that none of this stuff happens if, a pandemic is a pandemic, right? You can do more to mitigate it than this administration did. It would be very difficult to do less to mitigate it than the administration did, but it's a thing that happens. The struggle to this idea that they settled on, where they this sort of bargained agreement with a fucking disease, where it was just well, we're going to give it 3 months. Everybody do your best for 2 months. Try to wear your masks. If you can't do it because you don't like them, that's fine. Whatever. So we settled on that. And I think broadly speaking, people did the right things. They wanted to do the right things. And we made no progress on it. It don't really seem like anybody sort of worked on it. And so the failure of that, and then the more urgent and sort of violent failure that the protests are addressing, it's all part of the same failure. And the police are the way that power makes that failure bearable for them. That this is the thing that sort of keeps it in check. But I think, as you said, as this gets worse, that the institution that handles evictions are cops.
Right.
That this is it's just going to be the same face of the state on now a half dozen different failures at the same time. I don't think people are going to stop being angry, for whatever that's point. Worth.
That about evictions, that's a great point. It hadn't even occurred to me, but that could be the next flashpoint that we see with the police. And the real question is how are they going to address this? Because, it is, they're going to be specifically very blatantly, this is going to be a defensive property posture that they're going to have to take in this instance. And that's going to be interesting. I hadn't really thought about that.
And a much more urgent sort of defensive property thing than the standard argument about stuff like this is always well, think about the mom and pop Foot Locker franchise that got looted or whatever. This is somebody's fucking house.
Right.
And it really is, I think, going to happen a lot. So it's really scary to think about, man. It's hard. I think it was well said, the idea that we sort of bargained with this disease. I mean, at some level, it's I have this, it's this dynamic with my kid where it's just after a while, he just is yelling and crying and screaming and kicking so much that it's okay, fine, watch another episode of TV. Yep. And on some level, that's sort of what it feels like we have done. But the idea is that when you say we didn't make any progress on this, that is we didn't develop any contact tracing. We didn't develop any sort of I've seen multiple different things published by, some doctors in Michigan, or, the Times does a survey of epidemiologists. Where is the United States government saying we have convened this panel of epidemiologists
to come up with these guidelines, that these are the guidelines you need for, and the CDC puts out something and then backs off it, and then we don't hear from them. And,
it's all out there, but it's like, it's on their website. Like, they don't talk about it because it upsets the president. I mean, as cheesy as it is to like make it about the orange guy, like that's what it is. I mean, like he thinks that by acknowledging that the pandemic is going on, it's going to make him less popular, which is true. It will, like, not quite as unpopular as his handling of it, but the idea that you can just somehow at some point just put your head down and ignore it and like get back to normal, like, I don't think that that's on the menu in the way that they think that it is. Like the idea, like you can say that the Cheesecake Factory is open again, but like no one's going to go to it.
And then if they do, which I think
yeah,
they're going to get, they're like, it may not happen in the first couple of weeks, but eventually the virus is out there, and eventually it's going to be like, make its way to the parking lot of the Cheesecake Factory, and somebody's going to get it, and they're going to walk into the Cheesecake Factory, and then all of a sudden people in the Cheesecake Factory are going to get it. And I feel like that's going to be the story in the run up to the election, or, after the election. I mean, we can't, like you say, you can't negotiate with this thing. You can only mitigate it, but now it's become, if you're, definition of a secular, humanist, I guess, is somebody who wears a mask when they're out socializing with people.
Yeah. That turning it into that, like a symbolizing thing where it's like, if you wear a mask, you're like, whatever, virtue signaling or like cucking yourself or whatever, is like, I mean, obviously it was always going to go that way because that's what like everything in our culture is now, where it's like somebody walking down the street drinking a Mountain Dew, like, sorry, does this offend you? It's got caffeine in it. Like, it's pathetic, but that is like where we wind up. The idea that like public health could somehow become that, just become another way to like fucking trigger the other side, or like, it's worrying. But I think that like the idea, I was talking to a friend about this, about the hilarious reopening plan for the NBA season, that like, I think that we're stuck in this like bargaining stage of grief in terms of like reckoning with the failure to actually deal with any of this stuff. And so everybody's still kind of pretending like there's things we can do.
But there are things that we can do.
There are. We just haven't done them. Like if we had a more robust testing thing, if we had contact tracing, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have like basketball. Honestly, like it'll be a while before I want to play basketball with anyone again. Like the idea of just like the few times I've like bumped into someone at like a protest, it's like touching a hot stove. Like I've completely rewired my mind to be just like, no, like that's not what we do now.
But the weird thing is, in other parts of the country, there's none of that.
Yeah.
Now, a part of it is because New York City is the epicenter, and I'm outside the city right now, but the proximity to the city, people got that in their heads.
Yeah.
But if you're talking like Arizona or Michigan or a lot of these other places, people are just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like it doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, they're going to have to go through it. It's happening there now, but it's like, it's weird that they got to watch this happen to New York and Seattle and New Orleans and Chicago and all that on TV, and then sort of like see as those like curves were flattened. I think it makes sense, especially like you said earlier, in like the absence of any coherent message or leadership from the federal government, that they would be like, oh, well, that's over. Like we did it. Like New York beat it. But again, that's not sort of how it works.
No, it's not how it works. And it's, I think, I don't know. There is this sort of, I feel like there's this, I don't know what, I can't come up with an analogy at the moment, but there's this sort of sense where, there's a lot of spiking of a lot of footballs, seems to me. And I would even say like we're on the 20-yard line at this point. I mean, I would say like we're on our own 50.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of spiking of footballs that are taking place. And I don't think we're there in terms of, I don't think we have any idea what awaits on the other side of this field in terms of like the economy or perhaps this disease. But
I'm sure it'll be fun. Whatever it is.
It's going to be so fun. And for you, it's going to be a great opportunity to write about stuff.
Oh, it's terrific. That's why I have been so happy and been sleeping so well of late, is the thing that the last New Republic thing I did was like 100% me just chugging garbage for an entire week and then like writing a story about it, which I'm glad that I was able to like monetize it.
Was that the Twilight of the Cop consensus or the American Psycho? Because I wanted to talk to, because the other weird part about this, and let me just ask just briefly about this, like this whole part of the story in any other era would be the story, right? Like the fact that like, oh, the White House has just basically now been reduced to county supervisor. You know, Boss Hogg has basically won, and he's just handing out stuff to his nephew, and they're just like, like this is the White House is now being run like a small town corruption where it's just like, we got some state money. Great. Hey boys, come on. You're going to buy the property because we're going to do I-90. It's going to go right through your back door and that type of shit. And you wrote about that in terms of Kushner, and that's all that we've seen, except for now it's being applied to a pandemic.
Yeah. So the Kushner story is weird. Because it was for the print magazine, I wrote it. That was like 3 weeks ago. And, before the protest blew up and before all of this. And so it felt like sort of a relic of another time. Like, it's not like you can't get mad about Jared Kushner fucking up 6 different things every single day as like part of his job as one of the 3 people that's allowed to make decisions in the White House or whatever. But like, it's not the thing that people were angry about before. But in reading it back over, I was like, oh yeah, this actually sucks ass. Like, this is really bad. And Kushner himself, I mean, the story is mostly about how he sort of assembled this sort of shadow procurement team out of management consultant people that were they were working for free. They were basically sort of like donated to the federal government to buy PPE but mostly to like answer emails from Trump's friends. Like Janine Pirro asked for a hospital to get a bunch of masks and they sent it to him. And it's like, so that's the corrupt, like county government part that you were saying. The other bit of it, is that it feels like a shitty family business. Like it's like just a mismanaged Quiznos franchise with like a lot of backstabbing and a lot of like kind of mediocre people scheming in dumb guy ways about stuff, which is like, if it's a bad way to run your Quiznos, and I know Quiznos doesn't exist anymore. I miss Quiznos. They toasted the sandwiches.
I understand.
It was solid. But like, if that's not a way to run a franchise, then like running this incredibly difficult, task like that is even worse.
Do you think that the utter absence of a response that could even be sort of like it's almost like immeasurable, their response to this?
Yeah.
Because it's so like, it's literally like they show up on a baseball field with a basketball and start to kick it.
The numbers are outlandish with that.
Like, how do you like even like say like you're bad at baseball? You're kicking a basketball you brought.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't even like their absence of any type of response, is that creating some more space or less space for the type of protest and pushback that they're getting?
I think that's a really interesting question. My instinct is to say that it's more, but it's also, again, it like is pointing back to the same sort of critique that all of this sort of fits into, which is that like the idea of being like, all right, well, we got to take this out of the hands of the cops and put it in the hands of some higher authority. Like the higher authority isn't doing anything. Like they've been on vacation since March. And so the idea of like, it makes you sort of feel abandoned in a way. That like the idea that like, obviously that the White House didn't take this seriously is disgusting and scandalous and enraging and all of that. But there's also like to see the extent to which they failed, that like all of this stuff, they get up there and say that they're going to do something without a plan to do it. And then the thing I keep coming back to is the idea of those remote, like sort of drive-through testing facilities.
Right.
And they were like, we're going to have these in every state. We're partnering with Walgreens or whatever. And then there was like 40 of them 3 weeks later in the entire country. Like, if you're going to say that you're going to do something and you don't know how to do it, and then you don't do it, like, where does that sort of leave you as a concerned citizen, right? Like, it just makes it seem like you need to radically re-examine and rebuild everything that is designed to facilitate this, because it's not, like you said, it's not like a failure of like scope or scale or whatever. Like, it is like an error of kind. Like, they authentically do not know what the job is and can't do it.
That actually may be a great title for this era.
Feels good.
Authentically don't know what the job is, nor can they do it.
Yeah.
David Roth, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We're going to put a link to both those pieces on majority.fm.
Thanks,
stay safe, and thanks for joining us.
Right on. You too. See you.
All right, folks. That brings us to the end of our free half of the program today. It's Friday. I'm going to endeavor to persevere, do some fun half with the, like I say, only 60% of my vocal skills today. But I will take this opportunity to remind you that it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Your support, very much appreciated. If you want the fun half, but you don't have the funds, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Have patience. For some reason you haven't heard from us in like a month, send the email again, because sometimes they fall through the cracks. But you can become a member, jointhemajorityreport.com. You also can sign up for the AM Quickie, which is a 5 to 8 minute news brief every day. Should be available to you by 9 a.m. You can find it on our app, or you can find it in any of your podcast receptacles or providers or whatever it is, amquickie.com to sign up. Totally free. Enjoy it. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. We got merch now. I meant to wear a hat today, but I didn't. My daughter took the sweatshirt. The hoodies are so comfortable. I want to break it out too. I want to do like a lightweight hoodie, a heavy hoodie. Oh, really loving the merch. And you can check that out at shop.majorityreportradio.com. And don't forget, check out TMBS this week. Find it at patreon.com/TMBS and youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. He's got Chomsky coming up in the next week or so. So make sure you check that out. Also, Nomiki Nomiki's show. You can find the Nomiki Show on patreon.com/Nomiki Show, and also on youtube.com, the Nomiki Show. And of course, the Antifada. Jamie.
Hello.
What have you guys been up to?
So much, Sam. In between attending.
Did you move your backdrop?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. I take my laptop in my room. I put it back. Maybe it's at a different angle. Does it look all right?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. So in between attending all of these protests and protests plus, as I call them, we've been recording a lot of content. So this week on the Antifada, we had our 100th episode, which is actually probably closer to 200 because we don't number the bonuses. But that was pretty exciting. So, and it was a very fortuitous time in world history to be having our 100th episode, considering our motto is unrest is best. So we talked about the unrest. Yeah, you like that, don't you?
I do like that.
We talked about the widespread unrest and what it means in this country and kind of the pivotal moment in which we find ourselves. That's in the episode that came out Wednesday. And then today we put out a bonus episode that is actually a free bonus for everyone to listen to. Usually the bonuses are for patrons. And we took some questions from the listeners, and folks had a lot of questions about police abolition, as well as how we envision life after capitalism and what went on at the crazy parties that I used to throw. So check that out. Patreon.com/the Antifada.
Yeah, I regret not going to those parties.
Well, maybe once we get communism, I can go back to focusing on other things like music, nightlife, and throwing really cool parties.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will hold you to that. Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover?
Yeah, twitch.tv/literary hangover. Go follow there. I'm going to be playing Assassin's Creed Rogue while listening to the very first sea tale in American novel history, the pilot by James Fenimore Cooper. So check that out, folks.
Folks, we're not going to take any calls today because I just don't want to, I feel bad having people hold on, but I will take IMs. So you can get on the app. You can get the app at majorityapp.com. Get on there and IM us, and we will read IMs. Oh, good. Brendan just told me that somebody clipped my F. Michael Tracy sound drop. Well, that's good. I apologize for swearing on the show.
It's going to be real hard for me not to swear now that you've broken the seal, Sam. I'm just warning you.
I didn't mean to do that. It was in the moment. I was just like that.
No, I respect it.
Oh,
I'm pro swearing. I think people should swear when obscene things are happening.
Wasn't it Ben that said it?
I don't know.
No, you definitely said it.
Oh, I'm just going by what Brendan said. All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
Left is best.
Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. Oh, no, yeah, there we go. You can hear me, right, Jamie?
Yes.
She's muted.
Whoops.
This is. I thought this was sort of funny. I guess. We have these stories of the military brass basically apologizing for their role in what happened in Lafayette Square and allowing themselves to be politicized. And I want to get into that in a moment, because I think it's, the idea that we have to speak of like the military as an institution in some fashion as like, at least they didn't go along with this, is just absurd, frankly. But I found this sort of amusing juxtaposition, because we did have, what's his face, Milley out there basically apologizing. We'll play that clip in a moment. But apparently there was a Manhattan, New York Police Department lieutenant, guy named Robert Kotani. He's at the Midtown South Precinct. Actually, I think I know that precinct. I think it's on 29th Street. I think I've been in there back when I did a show about cops 20 years ago or so. And he was one of 4 cops who, during a May 31st protest down in Foley Square, were asking the NYPD to take a knee. And he was one of the 4 cops who did. It was, basically, functioning like Kaepernick on some level, or, using the symbolism that Kaepernick had made prominent. And so he took a knee, and I guess he apparently sent an email, and I'm not sure who he sent it to. I guess it was to fellow department members. It's according to the New York Post. And he told them that the cop in me wants to kick my own ass because he made the horrible decision to give in to a crowd of protesters' demands. He's lost sleep over it. He said he struck the pose in an attempt to mollify the mob. The conditions prior to the decision to take the knee were very difficult, as we were put center stage with the entire crowd chanting, "I know I made the wrong decision. We didn't know how the protesters would have reacted if we didn't. We were attempting to reduce any extra violence." Now, like, what the F is going on there? He goes, I thought that maybe one protester or rioter who saw it would later think twice about fighting or hurting a cop. I was wrong. At least that's what I told myself when we made the bad decision. I know that it was wrong, and it was something I will be shamed and humiliated about for the rest of my life. What is going on with the cops that this guy is getting so much abuse internally that he has to write this sort of like, I don't know.
It's like a Catholic confession.
Yeah. Like, it's like, I got to wear the scarlet letter at the next PBA meeting or something. I've got to apologize. Like, you can't even play it off like, look, it was a tactical decision. That's it. But like, it's keeping you up at night. Well, there's some real, there's something fundamentally wrong with the culture there if they can't even handle that. That seems crazy to me.
Yep. That's the culture that they have. They're a bunch of whiny babies. And if anyone even makes a symbolic gesture in any way critical of the way the police do things, that's it. You don't get to eat at their lunch table anymore.
To me, it sort of feels like I feel like there were movies like this, like, I don't know, like about, high school boys playing on a football team. Like, man, I should, like back from like the 80s, like I defended that guy who might be gay and the whole team is like busting on me. So I had to apologize to the team and go beat the kid up just to prove that I was one of the guys. Like, it's got that vibe to it. It's so creepy and juvenile. Like, I apologize for kneeling with the protesters. Like, really? Seriously? What an embarrassment.
Yeah. I should also say that what most of the protesters want is not for the cops to take a knee with them.
Right. I mean, that's totally performative and whatnot.
Don't kneel with the cops, folks.
Yeah. I mean, it was funny because the cops were, it seemed to me, clearly doing it for those tactical reasons. I'm sure there's a cop out there who was inclined to do it, but I mean, he wouldn't do it if there was other cops around because he would know this is the culture. I saw a clip of some military or National Guard, maybe they were. I suppose they're military, but I don't think they were. I think they were National Guard, but they were certainly dressed in military gear. And there was some, one-on-one situation where a woman convinced these guys to take a knee or to actually, she wanted them to march with them. And it occurred to me that was, I mean, I again, performative, yes. But I took that as a sign that was a little bit different than I did with the cops, because I got the sense, and maybe I was projecting on there, but I think some of it was the case, is that the military doesn't really want to get involved in this stuff. And they don't have the same attitudes. Like I think in these police houses, they're being told like, they're anarchists, they're monsters, they're animals, the black people are animals, et cetera, et cetera. I think in the military, they have a slightly different, maybe not so much in every branch, but broadly speaking, a slightly different attitude towards race, basically because of there's institutional pressures for them to be less racist. And I think they also have a very different perspective on just the citizenry. They in their minds, I think, make a distinction. Like it's one thing to treat the citizenry of other countries as animals, but not our own. I mean, the whole point of why I'm doing this is because we're better than other people. I'm not encouraging this, but I do think that's the attitude, right? Like you.
Yeah, I was going to say they're certainly encouraged to be racist towards people in other countries where they're fighting them.
Exactly. Like, I mean, that's almost the way that's motivating factor. Like American citizens and these set of ideals are so great. That's what justifies me doing this in other countries. But it like creates this cognitive dissonance to these people when they're told you may have to do this to your own people. I don't think they are trained and indoctrinated in such a way that it makes them comfortable to do that. I also think that there's, some strong institutional barriers for them to do that. I'm not, make no mistake, I'm not putting these people on a pedestal. I'm just saying that they are trained in a different way and their institutions are structured in a different way so that when it comes to policing Americans, there's a lot more roadblocks there. And so this is why when Mattis came out, and I could give an ass about, Mad Dog Mattis, I think the things he's done to other people, frankly, is horrific. But when he came out and spoke up against Trump, it was because the active duty military can't speak out, and they were afraid to speak out, and they can't. He's carrying their message for them. And it must have gotten so bad in terms of how uncomfortable they felt that Milley comes out. The last we saw him was in fatigues, like walking around Washington, D.C. And they must have like gotten so scared in the U.S. military that they were going to get operationalized. We saw that leak from the Washington Post that talked about stores of ammunition, and the military kept outside of the city, basically on call. And here's Milley doing the National Defense University commencement and using it as an opportunity to apologize theoretically to the nation. Watch this.
As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it. We who wear the cloth of our nation come from the people of our nation. And we must hold dear the principle of an apolitical military that is so deeply rooted in the very essence of our.
Now, are you crying? Was that moving to you?
Yeah, it might be that. It might be that I'm allergic to my new cat. I'm not sure.
I for one, now look, there's a lot of problems as an institution with the military, a significant amount of what the civilian leadership does with it, but also within the military, those sort of our era of Pentagon papers that came out that showed about the just sort of like incredible amount of lies that were basically passed up and down the chain of command out of Afghanistan. But I am thankful at the very least that we heard that from Milley there as we get closer to the election, frankly. And as I think we're going to see more protests, I think they're maybe around policing, they may be around, frankly, the economic hardship that we're about to, sustain. But at the very least, and I do mean the least, that is encouraging, that there was enough pushback internally in the military that he feels he has to go out there and say that. I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if Trump loses the election and refuses to leave office and the Chuds somehow get up the energy to start a civil war or something, we know that the military would be not on their side. They would want to preserve order and the union.
Yeah,
for what that's worth.
Well, it's nice to know that at least that wall's not coming in on you, right? They're just gonna keep their powder dry and wait for the alien invasion, and they'll deal with the alien invasion. And I do mean outer space aliens.
Yes, full Posseidism. That is the future that we all have to look forward to.
So Donald Trump is holding a rally in Oklahoma on Juneteenth, June 19th. I think most people know what Juneteenth is. I don't know how long it has actually been a holiday. It is a day that's known as, I guess, Freedom Day and Celebration Day. It is specifically about the emancipation of the last slave in the, by the Confederacy. I don't know how long it has been a holiday, and I don't think we get any time off from it. But I guess it was in Texas.
It was first celebrated in Austin in 1867.
Oh wow! Okay, that's great. I had no idea that it had been. Well, I don't know if it's been an American holiday in that time, but maybe. But the point is, he chose that day to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the sites of arguably the worst single-day massacre of African Americans in this country. I think they were actually there were private planes dropping bombs on people. And so he chose that day to go there, which is an odd choice to go. I don't think he's going there to commemorate. He's going there for a rally. And but with the added bonus, because we are in a pandemic, of forcing people to do this, go show this image. This is at the event, sign up. And when you sign up for this, it's Make America Great Again, Tulsa, Oklahoma. You can register. You can only get 2 tickets per person. It's on Friday, June 19th. And by clicking register below, you're acknowledging that an inherent risk of exposure to COVID-19 exists in any public place where people are present. By attending the rally, you and any guest voluntarily assume all risks related to exposure to COVID-19 and agree not to hold Donald J. Trump for president, the Bach Center, ASM Global or any of their affiliates, directors, officers, employees, agents, contractors, or volunteers liable for any illness or injury. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen.
They have to say that.
Thank you,
to
Brendan. I appreciate it. Majority Report did better quelch that.
Damn.
Yeah.
InfoSec, guys.
Hoisted by your own petard.
Yep, got myself.
Nice try, buddy. We gotta smudge that in the video. We clip it. But I mean, that's basically where we're at now, right? And what percentage do you think, Jamie, of people in that rally are going to wear masks?
Oh, geez. I would say less than half.
Do you think it's like that big? I mean, it's definitely going to be less than half. Let's do a poll. Let's do a poll right now. Now, obviously, we're not going to get the exact numbers, but I think we're going to be able to look at these crowds and estimate what the percentage is.
I say a fifth.
You say 20%. Jamie, you want another bite at this apple? Or do you just want to say 50%?
Less than 50%. Somewhere
45%?
I don't know. Matt's probably right.
Well, I'm not going to hold you to this. You're
20,
not gonna get,
I'm going to do the Price is Right thing.
Punish you if you get it wrong. What?
I'm going to do the Price is Right thing and say 26%.
26%? Brendan?
Yeah, so the BOK Center fits nearly 20,000 people. I think they're probably going to squeeze more in there. And I think 35%. I'll go in the middle.
Ooh.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to do Jamie's thing, and I'm going to say 24%, because I think it's actually going to be less than that. I think it's going to be 10% of the people there.
I said 20%, just FYI.
Oh, well, then I'll say 19. F it. I'll say 10%. 10%. And I actually think that might be high. The amazing thing is that when pictures of Oklahoma get released, and less people do it there, by the time they get to Arizona, that's going to be the interesting thing. Because Arizona's spiking, and we'll see. It is this, and I want to be clear about this. I think that I don't think you're being sort of like super woke. I don't think your class consciousness, because there's some people out there who are sort of using the cloak of class consciousness to equate these protesters who are going out and protesting against what the police are doing with going to a Trump rally or wanting to go to see a sporting event or whatever it is. And the idea that there's an equivalence here is, first of all, we don't know that the people going to the Trump rally represent a one class versus any, more or less than another class in terms of protesting the police. But the way that people get there, one which is denying the actual reality of COVID, so as to walk into the Trump rally and say, I've got nothing to fear, so I'm going to, except for the yoke of the, government science, complex that wants me to wear a mask to maintain control over science over me, versus those people who say, I'm aware of the danger and I'm willing to risk it because this is so important. That is a fundamental difference. Because these people over here are not saying, I recognize they are being anti-science, anti-intellectual, anti-society. They are running contrary. They are being antisocial. They are saying that there is no response that we can have as a society that in any way will mitigate this external danger that we have to society. Whereas the other people are saying that I recognize there's an external danger to society. I am going to try and mitigate that danger to myself and to other people as much as I can. But I also recognize there's an internal danger to society that I also have to simultaneously take this opportunity to address. If you can't see the difference between those things, you're either lying or you're an idiot. That's the only thing. I said it before, but I'll say it again. Like I just the level of disingenuousness that is there for people who I think have the intellectual capacity to see the difference really makes me really question. And I don't like to do this. I don't like to question the motivation of these things. I usually just write it off as they're idiots or they're just trying to build their brand. But in some instances, it's like, really? Can you really build your brand off that shit? I don't know.
Well, we'll see if people really believe that COVID is a hoax when we see how many people wear masks at the Trump rally.
Exactly. And at the very least, the Trump people, they'll write it off as like, well, there's a lot of ambulance chasing lawyers out there. And somebody gets COVID, they're not going to be able to prove that they got it here. They're going to come back and complain like, oh, I got a crick in my neck. I got it because I had COVID or something.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he's going to say something about it. I'm sure he's going to
got to wear masks because you got to be politically correct.
Yeah.
Adam Carolla
the lawyers made me do this.
Carolla's going to, I don't know where, doing like events, saying the PC police are going to come and get him because he's not wearing a mask.
God.
Like when science like this is reduced to PC-ness, okay, it just shows you like how much bullshit is involved in this. Like when the IDW is going to be like, you're not taking COVID deniers seriously. That's an idea.
Yeah. And again, most of the people at the protests were wearing masks.
Yeah. The vast, not even like the vast majority, like I would say 90% of people are wearing masks, but for those who are in a position where it's like the tear gas is coming and you can't breathe.
And people that aren't marching are handing out free disinfectant.
Yeah.
That's at least the experience I had.
Yeah. Yep. I got a little bag handed to me with a mask and some hand sanitizer and a rag. So people are very conscious about it. They know the risks involved and they're trying to mitigate them. But you know what? There are plenty of Trump supporters out there who say that COVID is a hoax, but their behavior says differently. So
I thought that we were predicting how many would get infected, to be fair. I was worried about my number being on the screen. So I think I would say less than 1 in 5 will be wearing masks because I've been told that people in Texas are actively making fun of people who are wearing masks. It's like It is that culture thing.
Okay. You can't do that. You can't jump in and just say
I was getting calls from fans and
say,
I'm getting text messages now.
You're saying,
oh boy,
you're saying 15%. Okay.
1 in 5.
You're saying 5%?
No, 1 in 5 people will wear masks.
Well, that's 20%. That's what Matt said.
Oh, okay.
So what number are you going to choose?
I don't care.
What do you mean you don't care? You're just right about the
15%.
Okay, good. Then I'm still at 10%.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally speaking, I know the Republicans who are more like moderate and cosmopolitan-ish tend to take COVID a little bit seriously. They might say that they don't believe in it, but then they are taking steps to protect themselves. I know of some types who fit that description. Then there are other Trump supporters who maybe watch Fox News all day long and like my friend's dad in rural Rhode Island who refused to wear a mask until they wouldn't let him in the liquor store without one, at which point he improvised.
Good for him. So here's Fox and Friends. Like I say, Donald Trump is going to hold this rally on Juneteenth in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a week away. Here's Fox and Friends, ruminating like maybe when Donald Trump, think about what has to go into scheduling this so that the idea that Donald Trump himself doesn't know about it is relevant to these people. Like, this is just the most inane conversation I've ever heard, but here it is.
Time in Texas. In a couple of weeks, he's going to be heading one state north of where you were yesterday into Oklahoma.
Yeah, actually, Steve, it's a week from today. And that's a significant date for people of color. It's Juneteenth. And Tulsa, Oklahoma is home to the Greenwood community. They used to call it the Black Wall Street back in the 1920s. It's still seen as an area that came back from one of the worst race situations, riots in our history as America. So there's some question about why the president would go there first. But initially, and the headlines that were being made as we were sitting down had to do with the fact that Juneteenth is also the day in which African Americans recognize freedom from slavery. And it also is an emotionally charged day. Now, I just wanted to get an idea of why they chose that date. There are lots of dates on the calendar with lots of meaning, so I know that. And here's what the president said. Your rally in Oklahoma is set for June 19th. Was that on purpose?
No, but I know exactly what you're going to say.
Well, I'm just asking. I've not got anything to say.
Think about it as a celebration. My rally is a celebration. We're starting. In the history of politics, I think I can say, there's never been any group or any person that's had rallies like I do. I go and I just say, get me the biggest stadium, and we fill it up every time. We've never had a vacant stadium.
So Harris, he does not exactly answer your question. Do you think he understands the historical significance of that day, of June 19th, which is 1 week from today? And do you think that perhaps that rally will be about race relations and about law enforcement?
So when you let that kind of breathe and you hear us go back and forth a little bit more, he says that they're going to use it for a celebration. And I don't know if he completely knows about the Greenwood community and all of that. We didn't get into that. I was concentrating just on the thing that was really starting to draw some heat, and that is simply the date and the meaning for the black community as a side lane to what is going on right now among people of color and, all Americans. Everybody is, protesting together. It's not just people of color. But yeah, I think that's a really fair question that you're asking, Steve. And he's got a whole team choosing these things. So he says that they're going to celebrate on that day. We'll see what happens between now and next Friday.
What, I don't know what's more offensive. There's so much there that's offensive. First of all, Harris Faulkner having to sort of tiptoe. What happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma was not a race riot. It was a massacre of people of a race. There was a full-on. They used airplanes to bomb the city. Private airplanes were used to bomb the city, and the idea that this is a celebration that we're doing in Tulsa. You go to Tulsa to celebrate on Juneteenth. We're going to have a raucous rally. That's the way that they would like it. And the fact that she has to sit there and sort of hem and haw about it, this is the most embarrassing. It's about there's so much that is disturbing about all of this. And then the Fox and Friends people just sitting there going why didn't we get a briefing on what Juneteenth was? And why didn't anybody tell us about Tulsa?
It's nice that Ducey opens the conversation saying in a few weeks he's going there. And she's like, actually, it's 7 days from now.
It's actually
next Friday.
Juneteenth.
I would not be surprised if we saw some folks try to spin it much like when they were freed from slavery. Now I'm freeing black voters from the Democratic plantation.
Exactly. That would be Candace Owens going to be the big speaker.
Oh, yeah. We're finally free, guys. That's what she's going to say.
Now you're finally free to celebrate and to promote and vote for Donald Trump. Unbelievable. All right, let's look at this. This is a clip. So Bobby Rush, who's a congressman from Illinois, I don't know what district he is, but he's former Black Panther, obviously 50 years ago. 50 years ago? Probably, yeah. 40 some odd years ago. And so this story is just, I don't even know what to make of this story. Listen to this. This is happening during he's talking about this happening during the looting that was taking place in Chicago.
Explain to me, I've really never quite heard a story like this. How did you find out about this? You came to understand your district office had been burglarized?
Well, I got a call from my district director saying that my office had been looted, that had been burglarized, and she said that she had the video. Well, once we looked at the video, then we saw this amazing sight of police officers, and there were up to 13 police officers at one time or another. They were in my office, sleeping, having coffee, on cell phones, putting their feet up on my desk, and one had his head down on one of the desks in my office, fast asleep. And to make things worse, we had the supervisors coming in and out of the office. And to add insult to injury, Chris, when they left the office, after they had rested enough, slept enough, they left a dollar bill on my on the table there in the office, on the conference table. So that added insult to injury. And all at the same time, I mean, looting going on right next door, right around the corner, all up and down the shopping center. And these police officers didn't give a damn.
I'm so confused. Did they break? So is it your understanding they broke into your office to just chillax? And
no.
What happened?
Well, on the video, I was told that there is a caption, a segment that shows some teenagers breaking one segment of the window. And that's the only segment that had been compromised, broken into. All right. But they didn't come in. They didn't do anything. All right. No drawers open, no tables, chairs out of place, nothing turned upside down. So they came in, or if they came in at all, they immediately left. They weren't going to get anything. But the next thing we see is a group of police officers lounging in my office while looting and stealing and all kind of uproar happening in the shopping center.
I just want to be clear. You found this out because you looked at the surveillance tape, not because the Chicago Police Department at some point contacted you and said, by the way, we had a bunch of officers in your district office?
No, the first I've heard that the police officers were in my office was when we saw them on the videotaping, security tape that we have. We had a camera there in the office, a security camera, and they called everything. They called everything.
That is completely nuts. And my question is like, what are the chances they didn't realize this was a congressional office? Like, it's like, oh, we just went in, we found a random office is where we're kicking back and relaxing. We're not actually going to go out on the street. Our supervisor knows we're here. This is, rest stop.
Yeah.
What are the chances they didn't know it was a congressional office?
Bobby Rush was a Black Panther active when Fred Hampton was, and in fact, the place he was staying was raided the day after Fred Hampton was murdered. So I think these cops might have known who Bobby Rush was.
Yeah. They did this on purpose to send a message, a very creepy, authoritarian, white supremacist message.
It looks like impunity.
The message was received.
That's the thing that I'm really shocked about is like the level of confidence that these guys have that there's going to be no accountability whatsoever. It's like one thing, I'm not excusing it. It's one thing to do horrible shit and like, we got to cover our tracks a little bit because we could get in trouble. It's another to be like, we don't need to cover our tracks. In fact, we hope he knows it's us.
Yep.
right? I mean, that's what you leave the buck for.
We'll leave the tracks.
That's what you leave the dollar there for, right? You leave the dollar there for to say, hey, just in case you were wondering, we're not out of control looters. Here's a buck. That's what you're worth. I mean, that's the signal of like, this is a conscious thing. We're just basically telling you F you.
Heinous disrespect.
Yep. And they're probably right that they're not going to be held accountable for it.
Yep. Gupek, if C-19 were herpes, would the Trump administration have a better response to the outbreak? Arizonians are about to come down with the scab. Okay. Jonathan Armstead, Sam, you guys have to see Chappelle's new half-hour stand-up special on Netflix. He takes it to Candace Owens by saying she is, I quote, the most articulate idiot I've ever seen in my effing life. She's so articulate, she'll tell you how effing stupid she is precisely. That's pretty good. Liz Cheneyland, speaking of merch, could we get MR Carpenter pencils? Oh, I like that idea. I love that idea. Gigi Palin. Hey, gang, just walked through the Chaz this morning. The Chaz is the, I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically the
Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
Yeah, this is an area of Seattle that has been, I don't know how you would say it. Occupied, I guess. I mean,
occupied, liberated.
And it's really basically an area. I mean, I've read quite a bit about this. Really, basically, an area that is just police free. They're not really keeping anybody out per se. They're just basically saying like, we're not going to have policing here. And then it just seems like, I mean, it reminds me very much of Occupy, of like that same type of thing. Like, come in, we're taking this space.
Yeah, I mean, the autonomous zone really got big in the uprisings of May 68. And from that, a lot of leftist theory, both good and bad, has flowed. But it is a tactic with a history. Unfortunately, as of yesterday, I heard that the cops did manage to get back in because in order to really keep them out, if they wanted to come in, people would have had to get a little bit violent, and they weren't prepared to do that. But we're going to have an interview with someone who's there probably on the Intifada next week.
So Gigi Palin, I just walked through the Chaz this morning, saw about 40 people dispersed among a couple of blocks between the abandoned East Precinct and Cal Anderson Park. Super chill vibe, mostly people just smoking and chatting about the protests. No cop co-op was stocked with produce, sitting just steps from the massive Black Lives Matter street mural that was just completed. Didn't see any anarchist warlords with guns, but I did see a dad and his daughter seated on his shoulders admiring the street art. DMV Mike, George Soros is like a red herring from Scooby-Doo for the right. Googs, favorite memory of Glenn Beck was listening to him on AM radio in the late 90s talk about the globalists one week, and then that same AM frequency becoming Spanish radio the week after. Sabado Gigante. Snoozin' Sarandon, happy Friday. Just want to remind everyone of the time Sam said black Africans on MSNBC. Thank you. Butter, can we talk about how Dems screwed the post office? $10 billion line of credit controlled 100% by Trump. Lukeness. Quiznos isn't gone, at least here in the hinterlands. Tulsa rally mask wearing less than 50 people overall, not counting news media, event staff, etc. Yeah, obviously we're talking about goers, but that would put it around less than 1%, I think. Best Guapo. Thanks for a great show and everyone's insight. I'm going out protesting tomorrow wearing my Left is Best t-shirt. If anyone else is going out there with your MR merch, represent. Yeah, go out there with the masks. Jamie, have you seen the masks?
I've seen a picture of the masks. Haven't seen them in person yet.
PJT Joe. PCT Joe, got the mask from your shop. While wearing it, I have seen people put on masks after seeing it, presumably reading it. Oh, good. It is a message to the media. He's celebrating Juneteenth. His supporters, he's celebrating the massacre of Black Wall Street. Indeed. What we got here? Here's Ashley Ainsley, who is now, it's come out.
Ainsley Earhart.
Ainsley.
No. You got it right the first time.
Ainsley. Oh, sorry, I got it wrong. Who's Ashley Ainsley?
That's not a person, I don't think.
That's my fun name that I like to call her.
Oh, okay. I knew I caught it somewhere. So apparently it's come out. Are you aware of this? That, the other day it was reported that Sean Hannity got a divorce from his wife. I certainly can sympathize. It's a tough time to go through with the kids and whatnot. Apparently, though, it's because he's found a new amour, who was a paramour, and now I think moving into amour status. And that's Ainsley Earhart. They are the it couple of Fox. That's right. So from now on, I will refer to Ainsley Earhart as, maybe Hannity's beau and Hannity as Ainsley Earhart's beau or something like that.
Ainsley Hannity doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
No, I hope she keeps her own name.
Ainsley Hannity.
But here she is explaining, and I wonder if Hannity and her sit and their pillow talk consists of working out their talking points.
I mean,
why don't you try?
Speaking as someone who's been part of a political couple, I will say probably.
Right. I would imagine. Why don't you try saying that it's going to be a celebration? Let's see if that works on Fox and Friends in the morning, Ainsley.
I'm glad you asked him the question about the rally next Friday, because what an opportunity he has to bring our country together when it comes to race relations. I hope that is a celebration day next Friday for all Americans. Thank you so much, Harris. Congratulations. An excellent interview. As always, we'll be watching the full interview at 1 o'clock today. Okay. And she went to Texas and came back, so she is such a hard worker.
Maybe it'll be a great opportunity to celebrate the abolition of the final, the last slavery in a town where the blowback was such that they killed literally dozens of people, sent hundreds to the hospital, sent even more into almost internment camps, I think. I mean, what kind of who wouldn't want to celebrate that?
Not to mention the way she treated, what's her name? The black broadcaster on there?
Harris Faulkner.
The way she treated Harris Faulkner was like she was giving a child a pat on the head. Disgusting.
She's a hard worker. What are you doing?
You really managed to ask some questions that seemed like you were questioning him. And in fact, not just giving him a license to do what he's doing. Good job.
Ugh, what is
she's a hard worker. It's next to one of the good ones, basically, in terms of rhetoric. She's a hard worker. Oh, thanks, Ainsley, for.
Yeah, she's clean and articulate too.
Donald Trump, I think at one point they must have realized, maybe it was when the military pushed back, but at one point they realized maybe we've sort of didn't handle this in exactly the right way. Maybe I should have just said I was down in the bunker because Secret Service wanted me to be there. And after a while, I realized it was silly. And so we left. Maybe I should have said that instead of doing all this to make me seem strong. And our whole plan to get this big black turnout from me has gone down the tubes. Can we invite black people to the White House and have them tell me how great I am? Here is Trump at his Dallas, Texas Police Reform Roundtable.
If you're going to have to really do a job, if somebody's really bad, you're going to have to do it with real strength, real power. And I said, and people said, I don't know if we like that expression. I said, we have to dominate the streets. You can't let that happen, what happened in New York City, the damage they've done. You have to dominate the streets. And I was criticized for that statement. I made the statement, we have to dominate the street. And they said, that's such a terrible thing. Well, guess what? You know who dominated the streets? People that you don't want to dominate the streets. And look at the damage they did. So I'll stick with that, and I think most of the people in this room, maybe every person in this room will stick with that. And we're doing it with compassion. If you think about it, we're dominating the street with compassion because we're saving lives and we're saving businesses. We're saving families from being wiped out after working hard for 20 and 30 years. I saw the...
Dominate with compassion. Dominate with compassion. We're going to kill them with kindness. That's the way we do it.
Yeah, that footage of cops brutalizing protesters didn't look very compassionate to me.
Coincidentally, we're going to kick them out of their homes when the moratorium's up.
And then we're going to kick them out of their homes.
With compassion.
With compassion. Like, go with God.
We need to resume evicting with compassion.
We love you. Bye.
Best wishes on the outside.
Good luck. Honestly, good luck. Do you have a toothache? We'll have our cops very compassionately. Can't go see a dentist? Here you go. Here's Tom Cotton. I said this on Twitter the other day when Tom Cotton had that op-ed saying call in the military, right? And, you know, the military pushed back on this. Just to give you a sense of just like, you know, sort of his bona fides. Tom Cotton, and we bandied his name around over the past 3 or 4 years because as like the Trump, but a smart version of Trump. And he's literally been circling around like a hawk, just waiting for an opportunity to swoop in. And he saw it this week. There's been one other time, I can't remember what it was, like 6 months ago, he tried to do something. But this was the opportunity. And he is going all in because he is saying, this is him. The subtext of everything he's saying, everything he's doing now is 2024 is my time. That I'm going to inherit the Trump legacy. And now's the time where I do it. And when I come out there later and I'm not as severe, my peeps will know that what's in my heart because they had heard me before. Here he is talking about the slippery slope of changing the names of bases that are named after A, sworn enemies of the United States, B, people who were fighting for the purpose of maintaining an economic system that, and I'm being generous, maintaining an economic system that was completely dependent upon the free labor from their slaves that they owned.
So where does this cancel culture take us? What is the logical conclusion? What is the end of the cancel culture? I will tell you what it is. It is right here in this city, Washington, the District of Columbia. That's where it will end if we don't put an end to the madness now. Just up the mall is the Washington Monument. Are we going to tear the Washington Monument down? Are we going to rename it the Obelisk of Wokeness? Up the hill is the Washington National Cathedral, where so many times we have gathered as a nation over the years to mourn our great leaders, to pray for God's protection and deliverance in moments of national strife and struggle. Are we going to rename the Washington National Cathedral the Temple of Reason, as the Jacobins did to Notre Dame during the French Revolution? And what are we going to call this city? Can't call it Washington. Can't call it Columbia. Got to come up with new names all around.
Cedarville.
Because I will say this. The cancel culture, whether in its Maoist or its Jacobin forms, ultimately is animated by a single idea. That America, at its core, is fundamentally irredeemable and wicked.
First of all, this whole notion of a slippery slope, the whole point of a slippery slope, or the reason why you bring up the prospect of it, is that there is no principle. What's the word? The legal term for it. There's no defining principle. There's no principle that basically can, creates a barrier to a slippery slope. I think not honoring insurrectionists who are promoting slavery is a fairly tidy place to where to stop honoring people. Like the Tappan Zee Bridge used to be called the Tappan Zee Bridge, and now it's the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Where is the speech on the floor of the Senate about what we're doing with renaming bridge? The Triborough Bridge is now the RFK Bridge. Where are the people? And this happens all across the country. Maple Street turns into some other street. But we never hear people protesting about it. So it's not just a question of like, we're changing the name of the legacy. There is a specific principle in operation here. And that is, we are not going to commemorate or honor people who attacked the United States and did so because they wanted to own other people. That's the only reason why they're named. Not for any other actions that they took.
Right.
Like, I think he knows that.
I mean, I am all for revising the way we look at Jefferson and Monticello, for instance, but there's a difference between statues of Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, which are explicitly celebrating the awful things, and our mythologies about Jefferson and Washington, which ignore the bad stuff and try to pretend like they were all about just the Enlightenment ideas.
And his assessment that in doing so, in removing these honorifics to people who did horrible things, because they did horrible things, right? It's not like a mixed record here with this guy. No, it's everything they did that they're being honored for was for the purpose of promoting horrible things.
A slave empire.
Exactly. The point of removing them is completely the opposite of saying that the United States is irredeemable. If it was irredeemable, you wouldn't remove them. You wouldn't care. The fact is that the idea is that we are in a constant state of trying to redeem the United States. And so this is one of those things that you do to redeem it. If we thought it was irredeemable, there'd be no point.
I mean, I'm almost afraid to say anything about this because I wouldn't mind if it was a slippery slope to total reevaluation and overthrow of this capitalist, racist, settler colonialist nation. But most of the people doing it may or may not agree with me about that. I don't know. He's doing the same thing as Barry Weiss, really, when he's like when she was defending the New York Times' decision to run his editorial about calling in the military to shoot American citizens, trying to make it about cancel culture when it's actually about some very real, very immediate violence happening in the world. Or well, in this case, in history as well, but it's all connected.
And what his reducting to absurdum about the Washington symbols does is it distracts from the fact that these protests have become about material and economic priorities, not just renaming things. And frankly, if it is just about renaming things, it's a much more comfortable conversation for Tom Cotton to have than, where we're putting our economic priorities.
Let's check in on our buddy Matt Walsh. Desperate for takes over there. It's really tough. There's not a lot of room for these guys on the right because everybody's staking out the same territory. Matt Walsh is going to prove to you that there is no systemic racism in this country. And he's going to use facts. So just everybody put your feelings on check for a moment and let's listen to this bastion of logic, Matt Walsh.
What is the system? What are you talking about? You say the system oppresses. What system? What system are you referring to specifically? Whatever system there is in this country, you as a member of the federal government and you as a member of the Democrat Party and you as a leader of the progressive movement are not only a part of that system, but you are one of the people controlling it. And yet you are oppressed by the system, even as you control the system? It's, again, it's a remarkable claim. Remarkable.
Right there. Let me just stop you right there. The idea that you are, I think we would all say we're all part of the system, but doesn't mean you're controlling it. The point of it being a system is that there is no one who has no individual who has control over it. It's absurd. It's systemic. Continue.
It's stupidity. Ilhan Omar, her story, her life is proof in itself that America is not systemically racist. Same for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, same for Barack Obama. And yet these are the people who disprove systemic racism just by their story, by their existence, are the same ones who are the loudest ones claiming that systemic racism exists. And I know that, I get it. Anytime, and I'm sure that what I'm saying right now, this is going to be one of those things that Media Matters pulls and they put it on Twitter. Daily Wire host claims systemic racism doesn't exist because Ilhan Omar was elected. Yeah, you know what? That is sort of what I claim. Yeah. I think that's pretty good evidence.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, at least he's not shying away from what he's actually saying, right? Mask off time for this guy.
Well, he's just accepting frankly, it's a widespread premise that representation in certain power structures, it means equality, broadly speaking.
Yeah, because everything got completely better for Black people in America when Obama was elected president. They definitely didn't need to start a movement called Black Lives Matter during that time.
I also wonder, at what point did he think, if it's the case that Ilhan Omar's election or Barack Obama's election or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's election disproved the idea of systemic racism, what does he make of the Black elected officials in the wake of the Civil War? Is that when systemic racism ended in the late 1800s? Even though we had government-sponsored redlining up until into the 50s, even though we had such disenfranchisement of Black people's right to vote that we had to pass another law in the 60s. I mean, if the argument is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her election or Barack Obama's election proves there's no systemic racism, what does he say about the Congress people who were elected to Congress in the late 1800s?
Oh, I'm sure he would like to locate it as far back in history as possible.
I'm curious as to if that's the measure, if a couple of people can get elected to Congress, there's no systemic racism. There's no in the corporate halls of power or there's no systemic racism, despite the fact that we just see by coincidence Black unemployment goes up when other people's goes down during this. That the rate of Black COVID infections, the rate of Latino COVID infections, the rate of low-income COVID infections higher than everyone else outside of those cohorts is just a total coincidence.
Or it's their fault.
If you pushed them on this, I think they would say it's a culture problem. I think that would ultimately be where they'd have to retreat to. Yeah. That's where Charles Murray goes.
Yeah, because if systemic racism isn't real, then you can explain the disparities using race science or the cultural version of race science favored by Charles Murray and others.
And it's also cultural as to why they get arrested more for, let's say, marijuana, despite the fact that all the social science data says Black people don't use marijuana any more or less than white people. Or their rate of incarceration, simply a function of culture. I mean, this is what they're left with. But why even have to use the fact that Barack Obama could get elected shows. Barack Obama, by anybody's estimation, I would even imagine Matt Walsh would agree with this, was one of the most gifted politicians. Put aside ideology, put aside policy, whatnot. One of the most gifted politicians we've had in decades. Ilhan Omar's story is one of the most compelling stories that we've had of an elected politician. He probably wouldn't agree that AOC is one of the most intelligent, charismatic politicians we've had in generations too. But I mean, she's in her 20s when she gets elected. You take the average white politician and put their charisma again, like the average white politician without any charisma, without much intelligence, and their ability to get elected versus those sort of stellar politicians, like literally almost once in a generation politicians. It's absurd. It really is absurd. But I mean, this is what he's got. It's logic.
It's the project they have. They have to naturalize these things.
Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama got elected. There can't be systemic racism. Like there has been a total denial of the ability of Black people to pass on generational wealth.
You're going to tell me that there's misogyny when you know how many queens England has had?
I mean, right now they have a queen.
Yeah. I mean, speaking as someone who went to a fancy college, most of the people from a poor background or a minority background that you meet there are like the smartest person you've ever met. Right. And the white people tend to vary in quality.
Well, I mean, look at Matt Walsh. Let's go to some IMs here. Slappy Tubbs. Anyone else having a hard time explaining to their mother they still can't hug or kiss their grandchild? I'm here in Minnesota, and some people are just not taking the pandemic seriously, holding strong. But seriously, any advice? I mean, it's really difficult. It's really difficult because as the more people don't take it seriously, it's harder to explain. I mean, my kids have seen their grandfather, but from afar, and we're contemplating spending maybe like some time with them, you know, maybe going to the beach for a week at the end of the summer, but we will be in lockdown before for the days before that happens, 14 days probably, to protect them. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. You know, particularly for older folk, because they're, you know, and some people with other comorbidities, you know, huge chance that it's, if they catch it, they're going to have a problem. I don't know what to tell you. The ghost of Sam's beard. Hey, Sam, where can I find a good socialist primer? Asking for a friend. Is this like a beard question?
What?
A good socialist primer? Is there some type of
like a book about socialism?
Oh,
that Bhaskar Sankara book, right? That one's pretty good.
In fact, Chibber has some pamphlets out. So.
Chibber's good for the basics. I find him a little anti-communist when you get into more advanced stuff. But Socialism Seriously is a book that we recommend and use in a lot of our political ed for the DSA by Danny Ketch. I believe he was a former ISO person. It's really good. It's really readable.
I don't know that one.
It's good. It's socialism ... seriously. It's funny. It's informative, It goes over the basic arguments people make against socialism and how to talk to your family and just basically how the capitalist economy works. It's super good. And then maybe once you get that down, you can read the illustrated version of Capital by, I keep forgetting who it's by. But I've recommended it many times, and I'll tweet it again. Capital Illustrated,
I
available
read it on
from
I think I read your copy.
Hell yeah. I'm so glad you did that. And then it's kind of a trick though, because you get to the end and you're like, all right, I've got all that I need to get out of Capital and I don't need to read the full version. And it's like, just kidding. You still need to read the full version now. There's no substitute. And preferably, the other volumes as well, because that's just for volume 1.
I got thrown off by the ghost of Sam's beard. I thought it was like some type of oil, beard oil joke. M. Rex, nothing. Zoe Punny. I keep thinking the guest you had on a few weeks ago was talking about change during a pandemic, where he specifically cited the Haitian Rebellion as an example of such change. History will always teach us when we don't want to listen. Recently became a member. Thank you for all you do. Thank you. All right, we got 5 more IMs, then we're out of here. Zephi. Sam, you've asked a number of times why the Pennsylvania state gerrymandering decision only applied to congressional seats. Spoke with the person who wrote the decision last year, and the explanation was that the facts were specific to Congress, specifically examining neighboring congressional district. The ruling could easily be expanded to state legislatures, but we need the right case. I see. I dab. Sam, I'm trying to organize people in my rural area. I have zero experience. Are there resources available to me? I'm signed up for the Rural Voices Indivisible Summit, but wonder what else is out there. I can't remember her name now. Labor organizer we've had on a couple of times. Jane McAlevey. Sorry, folks. Read her books are very good, I think, in terms of getting into the sort of the nitty gritty about organizing. And I think that they are the tactics and the techniques and the principles are, I think, applicable depending on what you're organizing. Trash Den Tiger. Always good to see David Roth on MR. Betsy DeVos, maybe the best thing about breaking up my BF is being about to listen to the Fun Half Jam. Used to speed through it because it bugged him. That guy.
Good riddance.
Good riddance. Rick Humerin. Lindsey Graham got that charisma. Dr. Chaos MD, over a week ago, I messaged about feeling cowardly for not participating in the police brutality protest. You had kind words telling me not to be too hard on myself and to participate as much as I felt comfortable. Since then, I've been out in the streets most evenings, lending my body and voice to the cause. The experience has largely been powerful and energizing. I have felt our society has been sick and disgusting for some time now, and it feels good to get out there and fight to change for the better. I would also like to share a moment I had. I was making a sign with the names of people of color who had died in police custody as a result of interactions with police. I made a choice to include a name I did not recognize for every name that I did recognize. I very quickly ran out of names that I recognized, and the majority of my sign was full of names I had not heard of. It shook me at first and then hardened my resolve to be out there in the streets today, more than not to keep fighting. Good for you. All right, 3 more. Sam's mustache. There can only be one attention-grabbing attributes on Sam's Tinder profile. I challenge Sam's sideburns to a duel. Space in, calling 28 number, talking about Chaz from Seattle. I'm sorry, we're not taking calls. And the final IM of the day and week. Hey, I'm Our Nation. As someone who has comorbidities, and so does my wife, I have been hesitant to go to a larger protest, but I've made a point to walk around my area with homemade BLM shirt to, at the very least, cause people in my predominantly affluent white community to stop and think for a second. Haven't run into any ALM people, and I have had people here and there commenting in a positive way about it, no matter how small. Do what you can do to help our Black brothers and sisters during this time. Good for you. Left is best. Thank you from Brian from Chicago. All right, folks. Hang in there. Great week. Appreciate your joining us. Jamie, stay safe. Brendan, Matt, stay safe. Thanks, guys. See you on Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught. See the truth in a light bar.